Hello there, it's such a pleasure to connect with you, Vikki. How you doing? Vikki Reilly from Publishing Scotland.
Hi, Jamie. I'm really happy to be here and talk to you in St. Louis. I'm all right. Yeah, I'm nearing the end of my working day just now, so I'm sort of getting ready for my tea after
Absolutely. Well,
this.
well, thank you so much for speaking to us. You're in Edinburgh, aren't you? You're in Edinburgh at the moment.
Yeah, Publishing Scotland is based in Edinburgh, but I was born and brought up, and I've lived in Edinburgh all my life as well.
Absolutely brilliant. No, I'm delighted to get this chance to speak with you to discuss the Scottish Books Long Weekend, which will be coming up on the 10th of June to the 13th of June.
Yeah.
And you are involved in producing the festival. And I was wondering if you could tell us a wee bit about how the festival came together, please, Vikki.
Well, it's not a festival in that it's not going to happen every year. This is like a sort of one-off event that we're doing. Publishing Scotland is a trade and networking body for the publishing industry in Scotland, and we have member publishers across the country, mainly independent publishers. And we help them with lots of things to do with the trade and with networking with various organisations. But because of COVID, and I'm sure this is the same in America as well, a lot of book festivals have either postponed their programs or really reduced their programs as they do smaller online festivals. So as part of our tasks this year, we decided that we would take the opportunity to put on our own sort of mini weekender event to help promote the authors and writers from Scotland's writing community. So we're doing 14 events in 4 days. And we've got a huge variety of writers and themes across all the events in the weekend. So we're really pleased to be doing this and showing our support for the Scottish writers and publishers here.
Absolutely brilliant. And Scotland is rightfully revered around the world for its marvellous literature talent. It really is an incredible hotbed of brilliant writers of all descriptions. And we're blessed to have so many wonderful book festivals across Scotland, and certainly listening to you speak of the work of Publishing Scotland, it sounds like such an interesting sector to work in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not a boring industry at all. There's always something going on. And the truth is, Scotland has got lots of stories to tell. And that's what we're trying to show with the events in the long weekend. So we've got events on politics, we've got debut fiction writers, we've got crime fiction, we've got um, uh, writers who to show that Scotland's publishers have an international outlook. We've got kids events, we've got events for young adults as well. So we just wanted to show the breadth and depth of Scotland's writing and publishing talent.
Absolutely. No, it's looking brilliant on the website. It is. I'm certainly be interested in Gaelic fiction myself. I mean, it's
Yeah,
something I'd love to find out more about.
yeah, that's a pre-recorded event. We recorded that one earlier this week so that we've got time to because the event is in Gaelic, but we're adding English subtitles so that you don't have to be a Gaelic speaker to watch it when we show it on the Sunday of the weekend.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can see there's an excellent event on the 12th of June, so you want to get into publishing. That sounds great. That sounds like a brilliant insight into how publishing works.
Yeah, well, because that, as well as showcasing Scotland's authors, we wanted to also talk about the publishing industry as well. So we've put a panel together of folk that I know and work with through them belonging to the member publishers within Publishing Scotland, and we've picked four people who represent different aspects of the publishing industry. So we've got somebody who does write, we've got somebody who's an editor, we've got somebody who's a production and designer, and we have somebody who does publicity and marketing. So the aim of that event is to help any sort of folk that are interested in maybe getting into publishing themselves, just to sort of get an overview of what kind of career you can have in publishing.
See, that sounds brilliant. I've never heard of that before. I've obviously not been looking in the right places, but I mean that is fascinating. And Scotland does have this extremely rich history of publishing.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're going from strength to strength now as well. We've got so many brilliant independent publishers, one of whom, Canongate, won the Independent Publisher of the Year this year at the British Book Awards. And we've got brilliant micro presses as well, new up and coming publishers that are doing really, really interesting things, as well as traditional publishers who have been around for decades and more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's an illustration workshop on the 13th of June with
Yeah.
writer and illustrator Kate Milner. I was wondering if you can share a wee bit about that, please, Vikki.
Yeah, because we wanted to do things for a whole for different audiences. So in the morning of Saturday and the morning of Sunday, we've got little children's workshop events for young children. And Kate Milner on the Sunday, she's done a brilliant event for us where she takes us through how she illustrates her own books, her own picture books. And then she does a little sort of small masterclass in drawing faces and people and facial expressions and emotions, just to sort of help any young budding illustrators out there how to just sharpen up their skills.
And how can people access the Scottish Books Long Weekend, please, Vikki?
Well, the great news is that all the events are free, and you can register for as many events as you like if you go to our website, which is booksfromscotland.com. And on the big banner at the top of booksfromscotland.com, that's a bit of a tongue twister, will take you through to the Scottish Books Long Weekend. And there's a list of all the events that will be taking place over the weekend, and you can just click through and register for free.
Brilliant, that's so good. I mean, people will be so grateful for these opportunities to learn, connect, and engage. It's been such a challenging time for everybody. For people that are discovering authors and creatives for the first time through the Scottish Books Long Weekend, it's a brilliant introduction to them. And it is a wonderful thing that you're doing, giving people access to all this marvellous talent.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. We have such an abundance of it, so why not show it off to everybody that we can?
Absolutely. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to it, and thank you so much for your time, Vikki. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much for having me, Jamie. And remember, you can register at booksfromscotland.com. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll be there. Thank you. Hello, it's such a pleasure to be speaking with Caroline Knox, the director of the Boswell Book Festival in Ayrshire, Scotland. Hello, Caroline, how are you?
I'm very well, Jamie, and all the better for seeing you. And thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation.
Thank you, thank you. No, I'm absolutely delighted we've got this opportunity to connect, to talk a little bit about the Boswell Book Festival, which is the world's only festival of biography and memoir. And I'm an Ayrshire lad myself, coming from Ayr, so the Boswell Book Festival actually only takes place up the road at the beautiful settings of Dumfries House. I was wondering if you can speak a wee bit about the origins of the festival, please, Caroline.
Well, I'm married to an Ayrshire man, and I'd come to live in Scotland, and I had been working before I came to Scotland with the Enlightenment publisher John Murray. And I arrived in Ayrshire and thought, what can I do that will use some of my skills? And one day I was driving past the Boswell Mausoleum. I didn't even know what it was. And I said to my husband, what is that building? And he told me. And I said, but I didn't even know Boswell, lived near here. Isn't it odd that a writer of such stature hasn't been celebrated in his own county, or even, he's known to a lot of people, but he's not celebrated in the same way as other great Scottish writers. So at that point, a group of us created the Boswell Trust, and out of that came the Boswell Book Festival, because I realized that in order to get Boswell's name out and about more, we needed to do something that was alive and current. And it seemed, in a way, obvious that what we should celebrate were the writing genre for which he was so famous, in other words, biography and memoir. And we started, I was then very lucky because Auchinleck House, which is owned by the Landmark Trust, where he lived, allowed us to start the festival there. But then we fast outgrew it, and moved down the road in 2015 to lovely Dumfries House. So Dumfries House is the bordering estate to the Boswells of Auchinleck.
It's such a beautiful location, it really is, with Dumfries House. With James Boswell, the father of modern biography, how do people relate to James Boswell when they find out about him? Because he is a lesser known talent than he should be, and quite rightfully the Boswell Book Festival celebrate him. But do you find that people are quite surprised to learn about this great artistic talent, coming from Ayrshire, when certainly Robert Burns is so well promoted?
Yes, I think one of the problems for Boswell is perhaps that in writing such a wonderful life of Samuel Johnson, so I think, ironically, because he is like all diarists, he is the person in the background noting what's going on. He's not the central player. But then, of course, he wrote a book like The Tour of the Hebrides, which is, again, on that journey which Johnson made with him, which is endlessly popular and endlessly televised. And so he's known, but for some reason, his name doesn't stick in the same way as you rightly, raised Burns or Scott or some of the other great writers from his period.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how long has the Boswell Book Festival been running for, please, Caroline?
We started it in 2011, so we would have been 10 years old last year, but we programmed and cancelled 2 festivals last year, which was rather dispiriting, and thus our decision this year to go online, because we knew at least we could run it if it was online, and the situation was changing all the time, and we thought we didn't dare risk planning for another physical festival. And anyhow, decided to go online and actually to grab the opportunities that this offered us to reach a far wider geographical audience at the same time as remaining a very Scottish festival.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something that we've been seeing so much over the past year is although we can't be together in person, the ability to open the doors to an international audience is great. Do you think that the festival might offer an online component going forward when we do resume with physical audiences as well?
I think going forward there will hopefully be hybrid festivals so that we'll be back at we already have a weekend in the diary in May at Dumfries House next year, which we very much hope we'll be able to take up. And but I think alongside that we will hope to offer online events streamed from the festival, because there's no doubt from the interest in this year's festival that we're reaching a much wider audience than we would, because coming to Ayrshire for people perhaps down south, or certainly for people abroad, it's not within everybody's not everybody can travel to Scotland, so it's a wonderful way of us reaching them.
Absolutely, and such a great way of promoting Ayrshire as well, with the festival being online. I mean, it's such a wonderful area, so rich in culture and history, and certainly the Boswell Book Festival is a must-attend event. I was wondering if you could please speak of the programme for this year, please, Caroline. I can see that you've got some incredible talents and personalities there. Andrew Marr, Bill Paterson, Rory, Stewart, Janie Godley. It's looking incredible.
Yes, well, we're very lucky, aren't we, it's marvellous to be opening with Andrew Marr, because as many people know, he was brought up in Scotland, and one of the first early books he was given by his mother was Boswell's journals. And as you can imagine, he's hugely in demand. So we feel very lucky that we can open with his account of Boswell and his relationship with Boswell. And although we're online, we've sort of programmed it as if this was all taking place from Edinburgh Old Town. So we've even got a wine tasting after the Marr thrown in, which are from the cellars which were working in Boswell's time. And then we have this wonderful event of Beethoven, Burns, and the folk song, which is something I think a lot of people don't realise, that the great attraction Burns was for Beethoven, and how this relationship was possible due to an Edinburgh publisher. So we start strongly in the 18th century, and then we move out. The following, how I've structured this year is to try to build on the components that make up biography. So first we meet Boswell, and then really, if you look at Boswell's work, he excelled at most of the areas which we associate with biography. So Friday we'll be examining diaries, and we've got two, Simon Heffer, whose diaries of the American-born Chips Channon have been this huge success, and Hugo Vickers, who's a great royal biography, but also this is about his writing of the Cecil Beaton, the royal photographer Cecil Beaton. Then we've got Kapka Kasabova, who lives in the Highlands, and her wonderful journey to the lakes in Central Europe. And then, of course, Rory Stewart, who I think is known to many people. I think he currently teaches at, I'd have to double check. I think it might be Princeton or Yale. I will just double check that. So, but he's known to many people in all kinds of guises, but he's always been the most wonderful writer. And then looking at letters, we've chosen to go for a set of letters written from the Gulag in Soviet Russia, because in a funny way, each of those letters out to their on their own. Letters, of course, biographers as well as diaries are the most essential sort. Just to add, Jamie, that Rory Stewart is actually at Yale, teaches at Yale University.
He's a fantastic mind, a fantastic mind.
He is indeed. We then move on to memoirs and biographies, mainstream memoirs and biographies, and many are homegrown, and that there are lovely ones like Lady Glenconnor, who was maid of honour at the coronation and lady in waiting to Princess Margaret. Janie Godley, you mentioned, with her very harrowing memoir, but of course she's kept us all brilliantly entertained during lockdown with her spoofs of Nicola Sturgeon's press briefings. Andrew Cotter, who's from Troon, his extraordinary story of being a sports correspondent and suddenly no work, and then, commentating on his 2 Labradors doing things, and he turns into an internet sensation. Mm-hmm. And then we've got, as you said, I mean, how lucky are we to have Bill Paterson reading Boswell journals? I mean, he just makes them, what he does is he sort of makes the words so human that you can really feel Boswell behind the entries. So we particularly, and then of course, we've got the portraits. We're looking at portraits as a form of biography, and that's good fun. Starting with William Wallace and Robert the Bruce and ending with Sophia Loren and John Byrne, the great Paisley artist. We also have 2 first-timers as memoirists, Charlie Gilmore, Mohsin Zaidi, and then, of course, we go down the age range to our wonderful Schools and Children's Festival.
Absolutely, I was going to ask you about that. It's such an important component to have the Children's Festival. I was wondering if you could tell us a wee bit about the programme for that, which is going to be so inspirational for those young readers.
Well, again, what appears to be happening in publishing is a flourishing of non-fiction writing, which chimes very well for us, because obviously we're looking at biography and memoir also right down the age group. So we have a wonderful mix of authors, and we have events that you could join if you were 3, or if you were in secondary school, and looking at personalities such as Mary Queen of Scots, or Charles and Mary Rennie Mackintosh, or Rosa Parks, or the Jacobites, or the Egyptians. There's a huge range of subject matter. And I mean, we've been so keen on the Children's Festival ever since we started, because we've seen, although we can't this year do it, we've seen the power that meeting an author has on children. And even though this year will be online, again, we're able to get to audiences who wouldn't necessarily come to the festival, because it's not something that's a tradition in their families. So we're particularly pleased to reach so many different people. We're very keen on using illustration as a way of making books accessible to all kinds of readers. And also in a year for children where they've been isolated in many cases, I think it's very important to have talks which address how you tell your own story, because they've all got stories to tell about this last year. And we hope that in telling them, it might help them through what for some has been a very difficult time.
Absolutely. Encouraging and inspiring that passion for communication, as well as encouraging young people to understand that it's okay and indeed encouraged to share your feelings with the world is a wonderful and necessary thing. What do you think it is about biography as a form of literature that um, that is so inspiring? Do you think it is because it comes from the self? It's all about the person's character and their experiences.
Well, I think it is because we're all very nosy and we like knowing about other people's lives, and also I think that true is that phrase, fact is stranger than fiction, is indeed only too true. When you read people's lives, you can hardly believe what happened to them. You sort of, and you think, well, if somebody was writing this as fiction, would they really think that was a plausible plot? So, I mean, I've always, and I think to memoir, to know people we admire and to know, about how they came to be who they are, for them to share some of their difficult moments with us, their triumphs with us. I think it's very inclusive and also very accessible to anyone. When people say to me, oh, I don't read, because I'm terrible, I stop people and say, have they heard of the book festival? And they say no. And I say, well, do you read books? No. And I say, well, you don't, this isn't really, this is about people's lives, as and then I start telling them about some of the people we've got speaking. And then they sort of see that it relates to them, that these are books that they would enjoy too. But so I think, I mean, I love fiction, but I think biography, and particularly since Boswell introduced the psychological element into biography when he wrote The Life of Johnson, they make for compelling and informative reads, because you learn whatever period you're learning about. Like in the festival this year, we've got the Glamour Boys, who are a group of men who are anti-appeasement, who, and you've got the women who tried, you've got all these extraordinary stories, which a lot of us still don't know about, which we learn about through books. Or, I mean, increasingly, we do also, having this year's festival, it's interesting, the advent of podcast and social media how that is now having a big impact on so that in it's why we've got a masterclass in podcasting, is because podcasting is now leading to books being published out of the podcast. So it's different avenues into people's stories now, which is actually very exciting and incredibly accessible to everybody.
Absolutely. I think that's marvellously progressive and cool, having the workshop on podcast, because truly everyone's life is interesting to someone else, as we're kind of touching on, and having that feeling that our stories, our experience has value is so important to appreciating being here.
Yes. I so agree with you.
And how can people find out more information about the Boswell Book Festival, please, Caroline?
They simply go to our website, www.boswellbookfestival.co.uk. I should add that the festival, all the events are free. So all that anyone has to do who's interested is to register, and then they will be sent a link to the event they've registered for. And if they can't see it because the times are difficult for them, then they can catch it later on catch up.
Excellent, absolutely brilliant. Well, I'm so delighted to get this chance to speak with you, Caroline Knox, Director of the Boswell Book Festival. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Jamie, so much for having me. It's been really enjoyable seeing you in St. Louis, and thank you for your interest.
Thank you so much. I look forward to attending the Boswell Book Festival in person next year. Absolutely.
Oh, good. Well, let us know, won't you? Because that would be marvellous if you came. We'd love that. Won't it be fun when we can all be back together again?
Oh, hugely, hugely, hugely. So much to look forward to, but we look forward to sharing the word of the Boswell Book Festival for this year. You've got a wonderful programme, and again, it's a delight to speak with you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi there, James. It's such a pleasure to connect with you today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Speaking to you from a very grey but bright Ayrshire in southwest Scotland.
Oh, I miss it dearly. I miss it dearly. I'm so glad to get the chance to speak with you, James. Amongst many creative things, you are a director for the Boswell Book Festival, and I'm delighted to get this chance to find out more about your involvement with the festival and some of the highlights and components of the festival. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, please, James.
The idea for the book festival came from my wife, Caroline, who I know is one of your interviewees. So I had to get involved, really. But we've both been fascinated by books most of our careers. And I have written 2 biographies myself. And Caroline was the non-fiction editor at the most historic publishing company in London called John Murray. Which was by origin a Scottish company. And one day we were driving along in Ayrshire, and it was just after a very historic mansion called Dumfries House had been saved for the nation by the Prince of Wales, and which is only 20 minutes away from where we live. And I was involved in the campaign to save that house. And when it was saved, we were so inspired by what the Prince had achieved that we thought, well, what are we going to do next? And we were driving into the small mining town of Auchinleck. And in the great churchyard there is this beautiful square stone small monument. Well, it's a building, it's a mausoleum in which the great biographer James Boswell is buried. And given Caroline's career, and she has commissioned tons of biographies, and oddly enough, and amazingly, our marriage survived it. She was the editor of my big biography that I wrote and came out in 2003. We stopped the car and we thought, wow, why is this great man, James Boswell, not celebrated more, not just in Ayrshire and Scotland, but worldwide? And here he is buried in this beautiful building on our doorstep, and yet there is no monument to him. There's, in Auchinleck then, his name scarcely appeared on the road sign, which it does wherever you go in Burns country. Burns is everywhere. And so Caroline then said, well, why don't I start a book festival? And I said, why not? And she did. And before we did that, we set up this charity called the Boswell Trust, which its goal is to regenerate the community of Auchinleck, to restore James Boswell's mausoleum, and to promote the name and reputation and genius of James Boswell. And Caroline then said it has to be the Boswell Book Festival, and it will be the only festival in the world dedicated to biography and memoir. And that was it. That was the start just over 10 years ago. And it's wonderfully hands-on. I mean, it's run by our charity. It remains very intimate, even though over the last 10 years it's grown enormously. It's very personal, and the authors themselves love coming up to Ayrshire because it's now staged at Dumfries House. They all stay in the lovely small residence which the Prince of Wales has built for guests in the grounds. We give them dinners in the dining room every night, that we take them to see James Boswell's mausoleum. So it's very personal, and it's been a great, great success. So it's grown hugely over the last 10 years, but sadly, because of COVID, it's now not. The last edition was in 2019. So this forthcoming edition next week, the virtual edition, is the first sign of ray of sunshine, which will eventually result in next year's live festival at Dumfries House again. So it's very exciting.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, so many brilliant things to unpack there. Dumfries House, for instance, with the restoration work done by the Prince of Wales, I mean, it has generated so much interest and excitement in Ayrshire alone for that wonderful restoration work. What an incredible setting for a book festival. It's so inspiring and magnificent, and I'm sure there are a lot of people, not only from outside of Scotland, but even from Ayrshire, that visit the book festival perhaps for the first time, having no experience of James Boswell, having no insight into Dumfries House either. As a custodian of the legacy of James Boswell, how does that feel? How does that feel?
Each year it feels better and better. To begin with, it was quite frustrating because Burns, who is amazing, is all over Ayrshire. He has monuments in Central Park. You know, he's just an incredible personality and poetic genius. He was one of Boswell's greatest fans, and he farmed just down the road from Auchinleck House, where Boswell was, which was Boswell's family house. And he wrote Boswell this incredible letter saying it would be the greatest honor of my life if I could meet the man who wrote the life of Samuel Johnson. I mean, he was an incredible fan of Boswell. And so to begin with, it was frustrating because we all passionately love Burns and his poetry. And yet relatively few people really understood and knew about the achievement of James Boswell. But we were very fortunate because there's a very strong American link with Boswell, in that before the First World War, an amazing American colonel came back from fighting the war in France and went to Ireland to try and meet the direct descendants of James Boswell, because he knew or guessed that in their castle in Ireland, there might be papers that related to James Boswell's apparently lost archive. Because when Boswell died, the family shut down the shutters because he'd led quite a scandalous life. And they really rejected any attempts by people, including Sir Walter Scott, to come and ask them about Boswell and his legacy. Anyway, this absolutely tenacious and very charming colonel wormed his way in to this castle outside Dublin. And lo and behold, he discovered this massive archive that had survived intact. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of diaries, manuscript notes, letters, a staggering archive. And it took 50 years for this colonel, and by then another group of Americans got involved, to actually acquire this archive, which is the most important 18th century literary archive in one piece, probably anywhere in the Western world. And it resides at Yale University in America. So there's a very strong American Boswell link. And this is forged by this wonderful man called Dr. Gordon Turnbull, who is the editor of the Boswell Papers based at Yale. And he's incredibly charismatic, inspirational speaker. And so from the first year, every year, Gordon has come and spoken on an aspect of Boswell's life. And his contribution has been extraordinary because it's really brought back right to the forefront in this incredibly authentic and original way, dealing with the actual manuscripts, which then feed into what made his book so great. So it began being frustrated, but after 10 years, one is feeling increasingly optimistic that the message is getting out there that James Boswell is a man not so much to watch, but to cherish and enjoy.
Absolutely wonderful, absolutely wonderful. What is it for you about the biography as a format, as a means of communication? What is it about biography that you find so inspiring, and why do you think that people should get into the biography? Why do you think people should read more biographies?
The main biography I wrote was of a 1920s travel writer called Robert Byron, who was a member of what's now known as the Brideshead set, which was the group of incredibly brilliant young students at Oxford in the 1920s who went on to write, to be incredible innovators, mainly in writing, but also across the arts. And Byron was killed in the Second World War, aged 36, but he was a fascinating figure who was a great traveler. He wrote the first great modernist travel book about a journey he made to Iran and Afghanistan in 1936. And I found him totally fascinating because, and why you get up close and personal when you're writing a biography, a good modern biography. You're in that person's head. You're behind them, watching them as they attend a cocktail party, as they discover some new lover, as they do some tremendous deed of daring do. So the great knack is to get up close and personal. And that was the lesson taught to all biographers down the centuries since 1794, when The Life of Johnson was published, because that is exactly what Boswell showed us what to do. He got so up close and personal with Dr. Johnson. He met him, was with him, traveled with him to the Hebrides, wrote everything down. He didn't just write what Johnson said down. He wrote down what Johnson's friends thought of Johnson, what Johnson's enemies thought of Johnson, what a servant on the Hebrides thought of Johnson. I mean, we know everything. We also know, because he then explores Johnson's literary output, what made his creative imagination tick. So it's a very multi-dimensional portrait he builds up, basically of a man who didn't do much. He was a writer, but in the end, he was a writer of such mental activity and adventurousness that it is a totally compelling life work.
It really is a wonderful thing that people went out of their way to record their everyday lives or the lives of others. In the modern day, we might have the luxury of the internet, mobile phones and computers to type things down, but certainly for biographers, They really have done us an incredible privilege by giving us these insights into what life was like for people historically.
You're absolutely right. And what's so striking about Boswell's journals, particularly his London journal, which he wrote when he was 23 on his first trip to London, his father, Lord Auchinleck, who was a very stern judge, was very suspicious of his young son, eldest son, but he let him go to London, where, of course, Boswell made hay. You know, he went to London to seek fame, fortune, and, you know, to put it bluntly, get laid. I mean, you know, he was absolutely, and that is like reading the London Journal. It's a bit like reading Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, because nothing's left out. And, you know, there are these famous, notorious passages of him. Now, of course, it's seen in a completely different light. But in those days, you know, in the 18th century, picking up, you know, prostitutes or, you know, sex workers in London, and also getting terribly drunk. But at the same time, it goes from absolutely low life to high life. There's that gamut, and it makes for an extremely modern read. And it's really fascinating. He is a very modern figure. You realize that actually the 18th century, it was not that far ago. And psychologically speaking, it was pretty modern. You know, it was certainly modern. It would be like, say, the sort of you know, Me Too movement. You know, it would be, it was sort of unreformed chauvinism in a way, but you know, it was like the 1970s. You know, you could relate to what was going on then, or the 1980s, to what was going on in the 1780s. And that's why it's so fascinating, and why actually but if you keep a diary, it has to be totally honest. It has to be unflinching. Otherwise, it's pretty boring. And that's the great discipline, I think, of a great diarist, that you have to be honest about yourself. And he is the first to admit his terrible failings. He's always, and when you know, he's always saying, I shouldn't have gone with that woman. Oh, I should not have drunk so much. Oh, you know, I'm running out of money. Oh, why was I so nice to that man who I think is a fool? You know, he was very hard on himself, Boswell, but it makes for great journals. I would say that email is actually nowadays, when writers sell their archives, often to Austin, Texas, who are hoovering up all the great English writers' archives. The one thing all the great archives are now doing are buying hard drives. So because really emailing is rather like up to the First World War, when certainly in London, there would have been 4 or 5 mails delivered to your house a day. So emailing is quite like pre-World War I life in the city. But they won't ever make up for the diary. But I should think a lot of more people than admit to it are keeping diaries.
It's an absolute delight to speak with you. Thank you so much, James. It's been an absolute pleasure to learn more of the Boswell Book Festival. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been my delight and privilege to be able to be interviewed by the American Scottish Foundation, because what you do as an organisation is absolutely fantastic for Scotland. And of course, very joyous for the Americans too, because it's such fun for so many Americans to discover about their Scottish ancestry, their Scottish culture, and everything that goes with it.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and we're very much looking forward to the Boswell Book Festival. Thank you so much, James Knox. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tell me just how you feel, but you can't look me in the eye. You say you have these doubts about us, but you can't tell yourself why. Why are you so ready to say goodbye? Oh, why I won't cry, 'cause I'm made to be stronger than that. If you want to know where your heart is, go where your mind wanders. If you want to know where your heart is, go where your mind wanders. Where it wanders, where it wanders, where it wanders, where it wanders. I can't handle your smile when you push your tongue against your cheek. Oh, how can I feel this way? You say you don't know how to be kind, but sweetheart, that's all in your pretty puzzled mind. Believe me, if you want to know where your heart is, go where your mind wanders. If you want to know where your heart is, go where your mind wanders. Where it wanders, where it wanders, where it wanders, where it wanders. Stranger to the eye of your own blood is what you say you are, oh darling.